Hello everyone! Today we're going to be doing something slightly different. You might have seen across some of my different videos that I use different methods for closures of costumes all of the time. And often, because my costumes are so complex and the videos are so long, I don't really have time to explain a lot of them because I don't want the video to be any longer, or you know, it's right at the end, so sometimes you just want to get to the finish line. If you're anything like me, closures on the costumes are usually the last drudging step towards having it completed. And sometimes, if you know, that means 20 hand-sewn buttonholes. It's a bit of a test. I thought I would show you 3 alternatives that I use to buttonholes, and here's why. I'm also going to show you how to do a buttonhole, so don't worry. But buttonholes take a really long time. They're very intensive, and some of these alternatives are faster, by far, and some of them just produce different effects. So the 3 alternatives I'm going to show you are, the most common will be the first one, button loops, and then the second one is a chain tack sort of thing that I've been using a lot, and that is actually from a book, so I'll show you that book as well. And then the third option will be ribbon or loop tape kind of thing. I've used this before on a couple of costumes and I really like the effect. And yeah, these are just some alternatives in case you do have buttons in your costume but you don't want to face buttonholes, or you know, sometimes your machine might not have a buttonhole option, or you don't want them to be machine buttonholes and you don't have time to do them by hand. So first, let me just show you some examples of the finished alternatives on garments. So let's get right to it because I've already rambled a lot and I feel like this video is going to be very long. Okay, so let's get started on this buttonhole. The first step I do is to baste around the marked edge as if it was a rectangular box. This is not strictly necessary, but I just find that it makes the actual sewing of the buttonhole a lot easier. And this is just with a really plain running stitch like this. And so that makes a little box, and then the next step, I'm actually going to cut the slit. There's a few different ways to do this. The way I usually prefer to do it is to make a small perforation with an awl like this, and then I can use my scissors by just very carefully sliding them in and cutting along the slit. I don't usually go all the way to the corners, and I leave a little bit of slack there, like this. So then the next step is to take the same basting thread you had, and then I just go ahead and do a basic basting whip stitch around the slit. This is also not strictly necessary, but it makes the sewing of the buttonhole a lot easier later on, like this. So I think this is a good time to very briefly talk about thread for buttonholes. So you can really use any kind of thread. The only thing I would recommend is that it's not normal sewing thread. This is too thin. I've tried this, it doesn't work. In general, what they recommend you use is something called buttonhole silk twist. And I'll just show you the thickness. So I'm actually going to do a couple of different buttonholes so you can see the difference in threads. The other threads I have here is a simple twisted silk. The other option is sort of heavy sewing thread or extra strong thread. This is just the basic Gutterman. I'm just going to show you a couple of different options so you can see. And then the final option, which is what I'm actually going to start with, is embroidery thread. So obviously you want buttonholes to be strong and to last a long time, and so ideally you'd want to use a really, really strong thread. In this case, embroidery cotton might not be it, but what you can do is you can always use wax to strengthen your thread, and this can be for any of them really. I'm actually going to try this buttonhole with embroidery cotton, however, because my cotton is very, very lightweight, I'm actually just going to thin out the embroidery cotton by removing 3 strands. So first you'll want to bring up your needle, and then you want to take a stitch next to it. And what you're going to do is called the buttonhole stitch, and the buttonhole stitch basically creates a loop or a knot of thread just on the edge of the buttonhole opening there, which is really good because it reinforces that edge. So I usually do just one basic whip stitch first, and then you bring up your needle and you take the tail of your thread under the back of the needle and under the front of the needle like this, and then you just pull your needle through, and I usually slow down and carefully pull it so that the knot is positioned at the edge of the fabric. And usually I do quite close knit together buttonholes, which means I put my stitches very close together. I just prefer the look of this. It's not necessary. So when you get to the corners, you just keep doing the same thing. What I do is I sort of separate. I don't do my stitches as close together because there's less space for the knots on that edge. So you just have to kind of manipulate it and then do it a little bit more spaced out. I usually do about 3 or 4 stitches in a corner like that. Okay, and then to finish up, I just usually just sink my needle in like so, and then I just do a couple of stitches in the back that won't show through to the front. And a knot, and that's it. So obviously this is a little bit messy. I apologize for my choice in fabric and buttonhole, but you can see the idea. I'm not going to go ahead and make one in my usual silk thread and one in the extra strong gossamer thread, just so you can see the difference. And I'm also going to time it because I'm not sure how long it takes me to do one buttonhole. And these are quite small. These are only 2 centimeters wide. So let's see. I just wanted to mention real quick as well, as I was finishing, I was starting the second, third buttonhole, whatever, that there is another way to cut buttonholes if you wish. These are buttonhole cutters. I don't know what they're called actually, but these are just really sharp little tools like this, and I bought a set online for I think like a tenner or something, and they're very useful when you have a lot of them because you really do want a really crisp and clean cut. So what you do is you pick an appropriate size and then you just whack it. So something you have to keep in mind is that I absolutely recommend it to have a piece of wood underneath because it's very sharp, and be very careful with your hands. You can see here that I picked the wrong size because it didn't go all the way to the end. You can just use the cutter again or scissors, whatever. But yeah, I just thought I'd mention that because it is a nice tool to have, especially if you have a lot of buttonholes to do. Well, this is an attractive angle. Please excuse the messy background. This is a sewing room. So I've just finished the other 2 buttonhole samples and I just wanted to show you. So obviously the more you do buttonholes, the better you'll be at them. It's really just a practice sort of thing. I haven't done a buttonhole in a very long time. But yeah, so here is the one with the cotton embroidery thread. And beneath it we have the gossamer extra strong sewing thread. And then this one is just a silk twist that I had in my stash. It is very similar in thickness to the buttonhole silk twist that is marketed for buttonholes, so I felt pretty confident in using it. And actually the gossamer sewing thread is a very similar weight as well. And yeah, at this point, if you find that they are still a little bit messy, what you can do is give them a good press with your iron. Make sure it's the appropriate setting for both your thread and your fabric. Give them a really good press, and usually that helps iron out, get it? any issues. You can also remove any basting threads that might still be visible. But yeah, that's how you make a buttonhole. I timed myself for these and it was an average 10 to 11 minutes per buttonhole. And I know I'm pretty slow, so that you might be faster at it, but that's still quite a long time, especially for a dress where you might have 20 or 25 buttonholes. So I'm now going to show you the first alternative, which is a button loop. So a loop is exactly what it says. Instead of actually putting the button through the buttonhole, the button loop is set on the edge of the fabric and it adjoins. So do make sure that when you pattern whatever you're making, you allow for the fact that a button loop doesn't need to overlap the fabric. But let's get right to it. So I'm actually going to use the same silk thread that I was using before. I've also waxed this and it really helps with silk thread to keep it from tangling. So if you can, it's always nice to make sure that your thread is within the fold, but for most places that's not really possible. So I'm just going to do it from the edge like this. So your first step is to anchor your thread, and I do this by doing a couple of stitches usually. So you'll imagine that your button would be over here. You do a couple of stitches. Now you can position this in a bunch of different ways. You can make it so it looks more like a balloon, this, or you can make it so it looks more like a loop. So obviously you would need the other bit of fabric with your button there, and usually I would just try and figure out how long that needs to be just by doing this. And then remember, you don't want it to be too loose, otherwise you'll lose the tension in the closure. So I think this would be about right, and then I just put my needle back in and then back out, and then you keep a little loop like this, and then you just do this a couple more times. So that you've got 3 loops of thread like that, and then you're actually just going to do a buttonhole stitch around these 3 loops of fabric. Just bring your needle in through like this, and then you take your tail of your thread under the back of the needle, under the front of the needle, and then I like to use my fingers and my nails to push the needle there so that when you pull the thread through, it kind of can't really go anywhere. And then you pull through and you have a little buttonhole knot there. And then you just repeat. This is quite fiddly. So you take your tail under and under. Okay, and when you reach the end, you might find that you have, let's see if I can capture this on camera. You might find that you have, is it focused? Hopefully. You might find that you have like a little loop like this, and this is because when you were pulling your thread through, the loop didn't form properly. This is very common for me. I mean, that's just how life is. You can sort of try to fix it. Sometimes you can just sort of, if you weave your thread back into the button, sometimes what you can do is just put your needle through the little weird loop, like that, and sort of force it down by looping it through, like that. It fixes the mess a little bit, but you know, it's not ideal. So let's just pretend. So this is what your button loop will look like. When you reach the edge, you just want to anchor your needle back into the thread, into the fabric, bring it to the back, and then all I do usually is 2 or 3 stitches to really anchor the thread in, and then I just knot my thread through. And then that is your button loop. So, oh, I was really zoomed in there. Okay, well, oops. So that's your button loop there, and this took me 6 minutes. So what happened was, when I was making this dress, I'm going to show you this dress. I'll link a video to it down below if you're interested. I planned on this front detail here, which has all of these beautiful buttons. And while this isn't functional, so it opens and closes, it's mainly decorative. I intended to do button loops, but at the time, I think it was like 10 p.m. on a Sunday, and the silk thread I picked that matched the buttons perfectly was getting all twisted and would not behave into a button loop. So I looked to my books for alternatives, and that's when I found this chain tack thing on this Singer Sewing book. But this is what they look like. I think they're kind of cool, and you can see that, you know, it works just fine. And they're highly textured. I think it also depends on the sort of thread you pick. But they are very similar to button loops, and they're much faster to do than button loops, to the point where now I mostly use these chain tacks rather than button loops. Call me lazy. Okay, so this is in the book under the name Chainstitch Carrier, and this is because they actually intended it to be for belts. So I've kind of used it for something else here, but it works really well for me, and I find it very quick and easy to do, so I just thought it was worth showing you. So for this you will need a double thread. So I've got my same silk thread here, and I just double stranded it and did a knot at the end like this. So the first step is, this is basically going to be exactly like the button loop, but instead of it being with a buttonhole stitch, is you create a chain stitch just with your fingers. So the first thing you'll need to do is bring up your needle in the place where you would like your carrier to start, and just anchor your thread. And then all you need to do is take a small stitch like this and start pulling through your thread, but don't pull it all the way through. Leave like quite a long loop like this. And then make sure you've got your needle and your thread off to the side here. And then all you're going to do is you're going to take your thumb and your finger through the loop like this, and you're going to grab your needle thread. And then with some magic pulling and tension, you just need to pull on your needle thread like so until you diminish that knot chain stitch all the way down there. And this just takes some getting used to, like this, and then you just literally just keep going. I should have timed myself, but this usually only takes a couple of minutes at most, like so, and you literally just keep going like this. I will say this consumes a lot more thread than the buttonhole, so make sure you have a long thread, especially if you have to do a big loop. And then what I usually do is, when I get about what looks like halfway or an appropriate size, make sure you check against your button. So your button would be here, and you want your tack to go around it like the button loop and come back, but keep tension, but you need to make sure that it's big enough to go around the button. So I would just keep going. This is a bit of guesswork, to be honest, but you get better at it the more you do it. Yeah, that looks about right. Or you could do it like a balloon as well, just like that. Or you could leave it open like a loop. I think we need just a couple more for the size of this button. I think that's about right. So then what I do is I take my needle and I put it through the loop, and this should create a knot. And you can see that when you pull, that doesn't come apart. So then all you have to do is figure out how we want to space it aesthetically or practically. And then you just need to take your needle and put it through the fabric at the spot where you want it to be. And then I also just anchor it again just by doing a couple of stitches to make sure that is really, really secure. And that is it. I'll just show you a quick close-up of the chain. I think it's really cute and really textured, very easy and quick to do, especially if you have a lot of them, and it can be really nice and decorative for buttons. And the last method I want to show you is actually on a kirtle. I think there's a photo of this on my Instagram if you're interested on a better close-up. But so I mentioned that you can do this with ribbon or tape, and I've used ribbon as well before, and I've used my own sort of bias tape made as well. In this case, this is handmade finger loop braid. And this can create a really neat, beautifully decorative and functional and quick outcome as well. Okay, so here we are. This one I actually usually do from the wrong side of the fabric, on the edge of the fold that you want to. So this also, very much like the loops, does not need a fabric overlap like the buttonholes. This is just for edges that you want to meet. So there's a couple of different ways to do this. A couple of people, the first time I did it, I made little loops like this, and then sew them together across the edge here, and then I put them down and hand sew them on. This took for freaking ever. What I have learned since that is actually a really quick and easy way to do it is just form the loops like this. And then instead of cutting them off and stopping, I just fold the tape and I keep going. Make sure you figure out the spacing of your buttons beforehand, but yeah, this is what I do now. After this is pinned on, what you can do is literally just shove this through the machine, and then you can take your scissors and, to reduce bulk, cut this side off, and then just cover this inside with a bias tape or any sort of tape really, or even just ribbon, and it creates a very smooth finished result. And that is exactly what I did for my kirtle, and it's the same if you were using cord. So for example, okay, so I've just gone and sewn my loops by machine. You can also do this by hand. As you can see, they're not perfectly even, and that's because I didn't try for them to be. But yeah, so this is what the back looks like. And now, because this is quite bulky, all I really can do is just go in here. And if you're worried about this fraying over time, especially with this kind of polyester cord, what you can do is add just a little bit of fray check to these raw edges. And then what you can do is just take, in this case I just have a little bit of bias tape right here. And there you go. There are your loops. I would recommend spacing them a bit more than I have right now, but you can see that's a pretty clean finish, and it's pretty straightforward, and it can be really nice and decorative, especially if you have a lot of built up stem buttons on a garment. I'm going to say goodbye from this angle because I feel like I've been talking at the camera for a very long time, and I really wanted this to be a quick, short tutorial. But of course I can never keep things short. And I hope this was useful to you too. Do let me know below. I'm very uneasy about doing tutorials because obviously I'm not an expert, and I learn how to do things in my own ways, and that doesn't mean it's the correct way. So just keep that in mind, and do let me know if you'd like to see more of these. I'd also like to give a big thank you to my Patreons. If you'd like to check out my Patreon, there is a link on the description and a link up in the box. It's their support over there that really allows me to keep doing videos like this. And yeah, please check it out if you can, and I'll see you all soon.